Hi, everybody. Welcome back for the first time to the final session in our webinar series. And we are happy to see you here. So this session aimed to bring together people from across the art world, as always, artists, creators, collectors, galleries, and as well as anyone curious about what's going on the art market. And as I said before, we are happy to see you here. So my name is Evelyn, and I'm head of communication at Digital Original. And who Digital Original is, if you didn't know. So we are a solution, kind of Shopify, but for the art market needs. So what does it mean? We help artists, creators to build their own art storefront. So for example, you can create your own professional website with your artworks and sell it globally to global collectors. And you don't need any middleman, any coding skills, any design skills, or complicated tech. So you can check our website. I just sent the link in our chat. You can check and you can register and try it today in a real time. So, about today's topic. Over the past few weeks, we have looked at Gen Z collectors, digital transformation, and the evolution of the art space. But today we are turning to something big and urgent. It's United States elections, shift in tax policies, cross-border trade issues. These changes affects everyone from the art market and collectors, curators, galleries, institutions alike. And joining us today to discuss this topic, two incredible voices. Our speaker, Tova Osad, founder of Osad Art Management. She's worked with top galleries and auction houses, advisors to help them navigate customs, compliance, and art logistics, especially during major regulatory shift. Our host, Garrett Fletcher, Director of Art and Technology at Sotheby's Institute of Art. He leads courses on art crime, blockchain, and logistics. And Garrett is our amazing host through the whole series. So it's a powerful conversation to wrap up the series. So stay with us till the end and feel free to drop your questions in the chat anytime. And Garrett, the stage is yours.
Evelyn, thank you so much once again for your very, very warm introduction. It's always a pleasure and a wonderful, just a fantastic occasion to be able to be participating in this session. And this is, as you've mentioned before, this is the third of our sessions. The first session was with Will Corner, Head of Affairs at TAFE. Second session following that was with Nick Walter. He was the director of Vortic. And now finally, the third session out of three. I'm so excited to be joined on the digital platform by Tova Osad. Tova is a really, really fantastic individual, a really knowledgeable individual in all sorts of aspects of the art trade, which we're going to be unpicking over the next sort of 45 minutes or thereabouts. Now, just as far as housekeeping, if you do have any questions at all, please pop them in the chat as we always do, and we will apportion some time, a few minutes at the end, to attend to those questions. As I said, this is the last session, sort of last opportunity to have a bit of a chat about what on earth is going on in 2025. Now, as you might understand, there's going to be different lenses. I think we're going to be pursuing that question and looking at answers to that question. We're going to be looking at the question from a technology perspective, certainly looking at it from a regulatory, legal, logistics perspective. I think that's really, really vital, given the fundamental supply chain that is the international art market and some of the potential risks, some of the challenges that have reasonably emerged in the last sort of few months in that context. We're also going to be looking at sort of the consumption of culture, if there are different potential market sectors that seem to be performing well or underperforming, that kind of thing. Now, I could not ask for anyone better to be having this nitty-gritty conversation with me than the one and only Tova Osad. Has advised clients across all aspects of the art trade, public and private sector, and she knows about the things that we need to know about when we're considering how to, as we always often use the word, navigate the rocky kind of uncertainties that 2025 is bringing us and has brought us. And just prior to the session beginning, I did say, Toby, there are some risks, certainly. We'll be talking about them, but also there are going to be some opportunities. We've got fingers crossed as to where the sort of the glimpses of sunlight might be perceived as we get through, past the halfway mark of this year. So, Tova, where to start? Well, I was thinking, where do we start? What's the sector that we're going to be looking at? I thought maybe what I want to ask you first of all is I would like it if you could possibly rewind to the beginning of 2025. We don't have Donald Trump in the White House. We've got a reasonably different landscape to how we're sort of experiencing right now. Can you perhaps outline or articulate a couple of things that you've noticed that have emerged that you would be very, very surprised at looking at the art trade now that Tova at the beginning of the year would have been aware of? In other words, what I'm asking is what has changed dramatically or not dramatically in the art world in the intervening 6 months since the beginning of the year to now in any sort of context that you think is important?
Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited, as always, to be having a conversation with you, Gareth. um, Rewinding back to January 2025, it's difficult because we knew Donald Trump was coming into the office, so we knew. So there was, I think, more uncertainty actually 6 months ago. I'm trying to take a positive spin on this. We didn't
Yes.
know what was coming. And we didn't know how it was going to happen, but we knew something was going to happen because he had sort of threatened that for months. That was sort of from the US side. And then from the European side, we knew that 2025 was going to mean the implementation of import licenses for antiques, pieces over 250 years old, and sort of proof of provenance and the onus of proof of provenance. So we knew these things were coming. We just didn't know what they were going to look like. And we still don't really know. So it's about trying to navigate that landscape. So I would say that we know more now than what we did in January 2025. So I feel better about that. Um, but issues are still remain. And unfortunately, a lot of solutions are not as, shall we say, easily accessible. But there are ways to move around that, and there are ways to look at that. So hopefully that's what we'll be discussing today.
Fantastic. Okay. Antiquities are at the heart of many things that I like to research. So maybe I'm going to ask
Yeah,
you to elaborate a little bit more about what we did know was coming in that context. And you've suggested the sort of the proof of provenance, which is a really interesting,
yeah,
nuanced topic for us to perhaps to consider. But can you just, for those of us who are on the call who are maybe unfamiliar with the kind of the change that occurred in that context, can you just give us a little bit of a refresher as to sort of basically where we need to be standing now if we are dealing with those objects?
sure. So back in 2019, so this is a law that we've known about for a while, the European Union passed legislation that said that objects that were coming into Europe that do not originate from Europe were going to need import licenses and an import declaration. The difference is that, I mean, it's not 100% clear exactly who falls into what, but for the sake of sort of generalization, pieces that are over 250 years old that are archaeological pieces have to have very specific import licenses with very again, specific information about where the pieces come from and the steps that they have taken. A lot of people have said that this is after sort of the destruction of places like Palmyra and a lot of archaeological sites in the Middle East that have ceased to exist because of the tension in that region. So that's a huge part of it. And on top of that, there are import declarations for pieces that are also going to be over a certain age. Things that come from within Europe. So if you are moving things within Europe or things that are under a return goods relief, which means that they had been exported previously from Europe and going back to the same exporter. So if you're in Paris and you export something to me and I then send it back to you within 3 years, that's not, there's no need for an import license for that because it's a European good. If there are people on the call who know anything about commodity codes, this really focuses on the 9706 commodity code. So that's what we're looking at. There's meant to be a database that's going to be published, I think, by the end of the month, where people who are sending things into Europe can register. But this is really an area we've known about it for a long time. The problem is that we haven't had exactly the the implementation yet, so that's coming. I've just seen a question: where is my company based? It's confusing because I am American, but I am based in the UK. So I get that question a lot. So I just thought I'd clarify that immediately. I'm based in the UK, but I deal with movements and shipments all around the world. So within Asia and the US and Europe mostly, in case that helps.
Thank you, Tova. This is brilliant. I'm going to just drill down one more layer on the antiquities. Excuse the kind of stratigraphic play on words there. A little bit further about this discussion around provenance. Oh gosh, it's such a tricky one, isn't it? Because the
Yeah,
idea
it
of
is.
provability, that sort of thing. Have you got can you think of any case studies or any insights into sort of how one might demonstrate that slippery concept of provenance and what measures need to be basically where is the verifiability that's required for that, or is it sort of best practice, put it down and just that's sort of what we've got to play with kind of thing?
Well, what we've got to play with now is best practice. I'm a logistics person. I deal with logistics. So I'm a paperwork crazy person. I think the issue here is that what I'm seeing is that everybody in the UK and the US is worrying about this. And people in Europe seem to be like, oh, well, it is what it is. Yeah, I guess, I'll have to get things to come in. But what they don't understand is that the onus is going to be on them to also be able to prove these things. So the auction houses in Europe are going to suddenly see a dip in sort of extra European buyers if they can't supply the provenance information. So it's things like previous sales receipts, catalog entries. A lot of these things have been cataloged, especially if they've been in sort of old time collections or museum shows, things like that. So a lot of people in the antiquities and in the old masters world, are used to this sort of having to look at provenance and important collections, literature, but that's going to have to happen on a much wider scale. I don't know anything about blockchain, but I suspect that will play a much bigger role in the next 5 to 10 years as that technology and those elements start to build. And I think we're going to see that a lot more. It's not what I do, it's not what I deal in, but it would certainly help make my job easier if these details are ironed out at point of purchase. So if I was in a US or a British buyer looking at something in Europe, I wouldn't buy it unless I knew all of the provenance and had all of that information, especially with the under antiquities. I mean, for anything, but especially in that sector.
And this is me playing devil's advocate. Are we seeing less of German private collection and more actual names, or do you think
Um,
that?
I don't know yet. I think I think probably. I mean, if you want to be really nitpicky, German private collection is always a bit difficult.
Yeah.
Um, I think that I mean, without pointing fingers, I think that a lot of the um, agencies who are meant to be checking these things, like the Art Loss Register, or there's another one here, I can't remember the name, are going to have to play a bigger role and not just supply a piece of paper, but actually help sellers and buyers take accountability for these things. And there are agencies like that in Italy and France and Germany all over who, supply the lists of artworks. And I think that, restricted list, the Dutch restricted list, we all know about that. So I think that there's going to be also an onus on those agencies to have a look at this and to say whether or not something is acceptable and actually take accountability for it instead of just handing over a piece of paper. I think that that's going to
Yeah.
happen. That expectation will rise over the next few years.
That's fascinating. So potentially we're predicting that's kind of the role of that kind of intermediary custodian of verifiable information is going to become more important as authorities
Yeah.
perhaps, are kind of leaning on them. Maybe this is happening behind closed doors, but they're leaning on them to say, kind of give us the sort of the straight information, and then the auction can progress kind of thing. Or we're just seeing more objects being consigned to UK auction houses, perhaps. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I mean, and that would be great. I mean, the UK has such a rich history of auction houses and smaller, dealers. And unfortunately, I hate, I love saying the B word, but nobody else does. Brexit had an effect on that. I could talk about Brexit all day, but I know nobody wants to. But that had an effect on it, and maybe this is something that will help the UK market, especially because when we officially left the European Union in 2021, Britain made a very clear statement that we would not be participating in this directive from the EU, and that import licenses would not be something that we would be looking at. Um, there are other things that we still prescribe to in terms of our laws, like the Union Customs Code, but you know, that was something we were not going to take on. So maybe that will help our market.
Interesting. So, okay, so let's just elide
I know I brought
past.
up the B word, so now it's
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
dinner,
yeah.
and everybody wants to
I
say,
know, I
"Oh
know.
God, Brexit." We can't. Can we talk about Brexit?
I want to talk about something even more exciting than Brexit. I want to talk about AML, anti-money laundering. That's the real fun stuff, isn't it?
So I'm
Uh,
not. I'm going to say right now, I am not an
yep.
AML specialist. So
Okay.
um, I know things about AML, but
Mhm.
because AML is not connected to logistics,
Yep.
whereas something like import licenses would be. Like I wouldn't move anything unless I had all of the appropriate documentation. AML is really up to the galleries to tell me that they have done their due diligence, and I just have to expect that that's the way it is.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I know everyone loves talking about AML. It's not a big deal. Like it's so, if you do it correctly, then you won't have any problems. Like anything, right? If you do the form and you do the search, it's fine. Yeah. I'm
Absolutely.
not going to be great on AML. I just want to put that
No,
out there,
no, no,
but
no.
I'm happy to talk about it. You want my insight, but I'm not sure you want it.
No, I totally understand, and I think it's as you rightly suggest, it is an area of specificity that it really requires, especially with
Yeah.
people obviously attending out this session and watching it in the future. The information has to be absolutely site specific as far as what it is that's required, and I think you're absolutely right. Maybe suggesting that AML is becoming more of an important aspect for participants and agents within the trade to be totally aware of and totally on board with, and to be doing things correctly, is enough of a kind of a broad brush stroke on that topic. Basically, if you don't know, ask more questions and be more
Yeah.
specific in your due diligence to make sure that you iron out any potential risks, because those risks are the types of things that are going to come bite you in the backside later on when someone can demonstrate that you didn't actually pursue adequate due diligence in line with current regulations and expectations, that kind of thing. Would that be
And
a
I
fair
think,
way of looking
2 years ago, everyone was talking about AML. AML was everywhere, right? And now we're all used to it. So now everyone's talking about the US tariffs. Everyone's talking about, the import licenses. Everyone's talking about rising costs. That's what
it?
people are talking about. And AML is just something we've gotten used to. It's something that, we have to do. I
Yep.
expect that whenever I move something to a client, that's been done, and that's how I deal with it.
Yep. Totally. Tova, I'm going to pin you to it now. This is fantastic. US tariffs. Give us your view. Tell us a little bit about what you've experienced or what you've seen, what your contacts are talking about in the market in relation to this, and can you just give us a little bit more context as to sort of what has and might be potentially likely to be happening in that space for everyone who's on the call to be aware of, please?
Yeah. So, I tariffs. When they were announced on the Wednesday, on the Thursday, I was on the phone from 8 o'clock in the morning until 5:30 in the afternoon, because everybody was, nobody knew. What we've seen so far are lots of mistakes, lots of confusion. You're going to have to, I think in commodity codes. So
Yep.
essentially, I'm going to step back 1 second for those of you who don't know what I mean by a commodity code, because it's really important, especially for this sector of the commerce, for this part of the conversation. The World Trade Organization publishes commodity codes every year. They are codes that are for the worldwide trade. So the first 8 digits of the code are worldwide. So a rain jacket is going to be the same code, whether it's from the US, from Korea, from Russia, or from Britain. So it's universal. The last 2 digits, sometimes some countries don't use them. Britain does, so they change. But that's what's essential. Artworks, except for photography and manuscripts, artworks fall under chapter 97 of these commodity codes. It's called the Harmonized Code. Chapter 97 has 6 subcodes. So 9701, 9702, and so on. With the reason why that's important is that with the tariffs, 9701, 9702, and 9703 are exempt from being tariffed in the upon entry into the United States. So that means that if you have something that is an original sculpture, so that's 9703, you will not have the 10% tariff. This is owing to a previous definition of artworks, that artworks going into the United States will not be tariffed. Unfortunately, antiques, which is 9706, are tariffed. And that's sort of, it's very strange to me because, if a teacup is made in France in the 1800s, it can't be made then again in the United States at a car factory. So I'm not quite sure where that comes from. The important thing to remember about that is that there are ways to navigate it, but the general golden rule that we see is that if it can be used, then it will be tariffed. So if it's a teacup, yes, I'm sure you won't start pouring, hot tea in your Minton porcelain, but it's still a teacup, that will be tariffed. So that's sort of the general rule. I can go into specifics about what people are doing in the United States to try and avoid it if you are a gallery who's exhibiting an art fair. So essentially, the tariffs affect people in sort of 2 convergent ways. One is obviously buyers who have to pay the tariff upon entry into the United States. But now they're aware of that, the 10%. If they're going to buy an antique chair, they're going to know that there's 10% tariff on top of that. So that factors into their thinking of price and also the deal itself. But the bigger issue are art fairs. So because galleries aren't going to want to have to spend the 10% on stock that they might not sell. And it's not like VAT where you get that back. You don't get it back. So so when TAFAF New York was happening, that was a big scramble. What do we do about the fact that, sure, there are a lot of paintings, drawings, pastels, sculptures, lithographs, which will not be tariffed. There are design galleries who will be tariffed. And what do we do about that? So there were had a few panicked calls with Will about how we navigate this. Poor guy, listening to me talk about specifics on import bonds and things like that. I think he wanted to kill me, but that's okay. And they think, in the end, we sort of had discussions and we figured it out. But I don't know what will happen. I suspect the 10% tariff is here to stay. And the other thing I should mention about tariffs is that it is according to the rule of origin, which means that it's the origin country that the piece came from, not where it departed from. So if you have pieces that you, if you're an artist and you have a studio in Italy, but your gallery has, or you have a studio in Italy and you have pieces here in the UK, the country of origin is where they were produced. So that would be Italy, not Britain. And that's really important to remember. It's not the country from where because people were trying to decide whether or not if they sent it to Mexico or Canada,
Mhm.
would that make any sense? And it doesn't. It's about the rule of origin. So that's really important to remember.
Okay, so with this in mind, and I'm thinking about, thank you. It's brilliant that you've been able to so clearly articulate the specificity of the
Yeah.
categorization. I think that's really, really helpful because that gives us a sense of basically the kind of the slight reasonable contradictions in the categories. And you did quietly mention about potential workarounds. Are we able to potentially disclose any sort of suggestions that you might have for any commercial actors that might be trying to be, doing the right thing, but also uncertain about whether they can afford the 10%, or are they just going to have to build that into their pricing? Is that sort of how
Yeah.
it's going to have to be?
So I mean, I think that if you've sold something into the US, that's it. There's nothing you can do.
Mhm.
You're just going to have to factor that into your deal. If you are exhibiting in the US, the biggest workaround that I had clients use, and I think people at the fair used, was something called a temporary import bond. Now, for those of you who are based in Britain or in Europe, you know that there are temporary import measures so that you don't have to pay import VAT. So things like temporary admissions, bonded warehouses, free ports, things of that nature. The US doesn't have temporary admission because there's no VAT and they don't have bonded warehousing. So but what they do have is something called a temporary import bond, which means that if I am an exhibitor at TEFAF New York and I send 10 pieces to TEFAF New York and I do it on a temporary import bond, those 10 pieces then have to go back to Europe in the same way. So it functions like a carnet in the sense that the shipment itself has to stay together as it moves. So it's difficult because it's also part of understanding shipping and pricing, right? So if I have 4 sofas that I've sent to New York and those 4 sofas have to come back to me in London, and if I've sold one, it still has to come back to me in London and then go out to the person to whom it's been sold. So it's a double sword, but that's still in a lot of cases that was still cheaper than paying the 10%. So that's how a lot of exhibitors navigated it.
Interesting. And maybe just to sort of look at the chat, Svetlana's just made a point here. A quick question. If an antique teacup was originally made in the US 100 years ago and is now in France and being sold back to the US, would it be tariffed? Have you got a view on that?
I don't think so. I haven't had that yet. And this is all really new. So, I could say I don't think it would be tariffed if it was made in the US 100 years ago, but you'd have to have some pretty good provenance and maybe. I haven't had that yet. So I don't want to say, no, it won't be tariffed and have that be the case. But I would say check with your local shipping agents because that's the best way to know. I'm sorry, I haven't had it yet. So I've only had a lot of galleries decide. Well, I had 2 galleries decide not to send things to an art fair, which were made in China. So that was the workaround. um, so yeah,
Okay, okay. No, thank you for that, Too. That's really, really helpful advice, is just in regards to just basically being thoughtful when it comes to where your object, where you know it originated from, where it might be currently sitting or located, and then the sort of the location of sale. Is that, are you one be disincentivized from importing into the US in order to sell there? This is just sort of interesting food for thought as
yeah,
far as what we're seeing. But would you agree? There's suggest that you mentioned that the tariffs are kind of here to stay. But there's so much whimsicality going on in relation to would we be best advised to refrain from remaining in a position of certainty towards a sort of a position of
yeah,
fluidity and
yeah,
responsiveness in regards to
yeah. I
information?
think that I think the fluidity is a good way to think about it in terms of my home country. I think uh, it is unfortunately the agents are reacting as well. So when you speak to art shippers and art agents in the US, they are also trying to navigate and understand what all of this means for them and for their clients. Um, yes, tariffs are definitely here to stay. Trump, there's no way. Whether or not after the 90 days they will go back to, the original poster that he the reciprocal
Yeah.
tariff poster that he held up in the Rose Garden. I'm not sure. I doubt it. Because I think it's a political nightmare, and he wants to, especially for the EU and for Britain. Um, Although I don't know. I also don't know whether or not our government will decide to also do reciprocal tariffs, um, so that things that are coming from the United States will be tariffed here, because we don't know whether or not, if the tariffs change after the 90-day pause, um, if we then go back to them and say, well, these are reciprocal tariffs, contemporary art was one of the things that was on that list. So um, does that then mean that the US will see that and then put a tariff higher on contemporary on the artworks? I don't know. These are all things that we are watching very closely, and trying to navigate. There's a question about whether or not tariffs apply to digital format. I don't think so, but then again, I function in the sort of in the objects world. I don't think they've thought about the digital formats yet, and NFTs and things like that. I don't think that those are part of the tariff clause, but check again with your agents.
Totally, absolutely. That's the best advice. Thank you, Tova. I agree. I think there's a lot of discussion around the sort of the digital origins of objects, where they are being
Yeah.
located, what is the server basis, where's the creation locate, all that sort of stuff. And I think it becomes very, very tricky to strike a particularly clear line on the digital asset side of things. Of course, there will be people who will be making judgments in that space,
Yeah.
but that
I think
perhaps you
it's
could,
too new. Like
yeah.
when everybody was talking about NFTs a few years ago, and nobody really knew what it was, and people were trying to understand it. And I think it's still very new. And I think that the art world is very focused on the physical, right? We for, you know, just because of the history of the art world, right? It's about the physical object that is in front of you. So I think that the digital side is just not something that we have gotten our head around yet, which hopefully that will not always be the case. But I'm too old, so it won't be for me. But it's more of I just think nobody's thought of it yet, especially not Donald Trump. So I don't think that the tariffs apply yet to that.
Absolutely. And if you think about the kind of the stake, well, the skin in the game that he has when it comes to digital collectibles, crypto assets, etc., then there's an argument that he may potentially not want to shoot himself in the foot in that context, possibly.
Yeah,
But
I
that
mean,
again, not professional advice.
I'll park that politic to one side.
Yeah. Okay, let's move slightly away from the sort of import-export economic impacts. Maybe can you give us a sort of a view more sort of from a sort of a sociological perspective, or maybe from a kind of a, I don't know, the other things have been happening in this year that are really, really important for us to think about the impacts of. Can you maybe sort of just provide us with a couple of sort of things that you've noticed have changed in the way that you evaluate the sort of the trade in cultural objects? We're talking about different forms of production that are becoming more popular, less popular, schools of work that is becoming more popular, less popular. The position of auction houses versus galleries and that kind of all their sort of brinkmanship and the role of art fairs. Are there sort of areas within that broad? I mean, there's so many topics here, but
Yeah.
are you able to pick up like one or two little highlights of things that you think is worth drawing our attention to and having a quick discussion about?
So I would say there are two major areas, but they sort of all come into one. Um, I think that we need to talk, I mean, we should talk about the cost of these things. Um, Cost of living has gone up dramatically, as we all know. And I think that we are the art world is constantly looking for ways, and shipments go up. Fuel is up, cargo space. There are fewer flights. All of that is different now, especially in a post-COVID world. And I think that we are, in so many ways, having to really look at the cost of moving things, not just the cost of buying things, but the logistical costs. So I think that that's one area that we are trying to navigate. Another is the environment. We as our carbon footprint as an industry is horrific. And there are things like the Gallery Climate Coalition, but it really comes down to the individual. If you are a dealer and you have a painting in New York that needs to be in London by Monday, you will do everything you can in order to make sure that that happens, which which means you will construct a new crate, which means that you will put it on a car, you'll put it on a passenger flight, which means that you will drive a dedicated truck to the airport to pick it up from the airport and also take it to the airport on the other side. You will do all of that. And that's just part of it. And unless individual collectors, art advisors, galleries shift from that, we have to consider what that means and the impact that we have on the world of, in our environment. People hop on a plane to go and look at a painting for half an hour and then come back. So I think that that is something that eventually this industry is going to have to reckon with. I try and do it in my world where, we are looking for green crates. Crates can be reused because crates, I mean, that's a huge waste where individual pictures will have a crate made for them. And a crate can only be used 2 or 3 times. And it has to have certain stamps, has to be made of certain wood. And then once it's been used, that's it. It can't be used anymore. You have to repurpose it, or you have to break, and they can't be broken down because they're specific pieces of wood. Anyway, that's something that I think that shippers are starting to think about, but that we are way behind in that area. So those,
Yeah,
I would say,
absolutely.
instead of the global world, are two things that are focuses of mine, that I try in my everyday work and logistics try and focus on. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. They're so interconnected. There's a lot of, there have been a lot in the last, 5 or 10 years, there've been a lot of really, really positive initiatives that are moving towards creating much more awareness around the importance of promoting a more sustainable, for want of a better, to define a sustainable practice across the sector. And, it's probably fair to say there's been a broad reluctance initially, but suddenly when the ball starts rolling, people start kind of climbing on, which is great. The GCC, Gallery Climate Coalition, is one
Yeah.
among many different organizations would have been really key to driving those conversations forward. Are you aware of any initiatives that some of the big players have publicly acknowledged or acquiesced to that are doing good things in this space? They're kind of sort of front running in that context. I'm just thinking about auction houses. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wish that Sotheby's and Christie's would think about that. I really do. I know that some big galleries who are part of the GCC will do things like they won't allow air freight movement within Europe. Everything
Yeah.
has to go by road. I know that people are subscribing more to sea freight options, which obviously has implications for insurance, but they're working with their insurers to figure out exactly what that entails and what that means. I know I was speaking to a very good friend of mine who is an insurance broker who people are looking at train travel,
Mhm.
sending things on trains, which in Europe, I mean, I think that sounds like a great idea. We have such a great train network.
Mhm.
It's not as efficient in the United States, but why not?
Mhm.
Um, so I think that people are looking at options, but has anybody, come out and said, we're going to do this for 2027 or 28?
Mhm.
No. But I think we're just like I keep saying, we're just so behind on that.
Mhm.
Um, and we don't, and because it's not immediate, if because it's not immediately apparent, we all want the deal, right? We all want to sell, we all want to get art onto walls. or onto, into space. And the focus on that supersedes a lot of these other considerations. But hopefully that will change. I would like for that to change.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really important point you raised. And you suggested it earlier about the sort of the cost of living, but just basically the cost of participating in the trade
Yeah.
continues to, there's no kind of respite. And if we sort of witness what might have been kind of termed in the last couple of years, a pretty significant downturn after that kind of dead cat bounce of the post-COVID recovery, you're looking at some of the kind of the aggregated sales numbers and, you hear about auction houses laying off staff, you hear about galleries downsizing or shutting down full stop.
Yeah.
Getting that sale has only become more and more urgent now in some context, hasn't it? So it's almost now would be the perfect time to be pioneering those initiatives, but now is the highest point of risk for a lot of these organizations in their economic sustainability. Would that be a fair suggestion?
Yes, yes. But I also think that that's connected. I mean, this is me being, my own complete personal opinion. But I think that a lot of, the economic, we should be helping on the economic front and helping our clients and our buyers, especially in Britain, realize that actually, like, again, Brexit. I was always frustrated because everyone was talking about how the market is going to shift to Paris. And I thought, wait a second, our VA, the taxes are lower. Now it's better for the art. Brexit is better for the art market. Why are we? I mean, it's not better for the rest of anything else, but it's actually good for the art market. Why aren't we focusing on that? Why are we talking about, how bad this is and import VAT and the admin and this and that? And no, people can come here, not have to pay VAT, and then just pay a lower rate in Europe into Europe. Why are we making this a bad thing? And we do that. We focus on these negatives, and that has then a knock-on effect. So if we had said, oh, come to Britain, this is great. Our market should be thriving because we have all of these initiatives that means you don't have to pay margin scheme VAT, or you don't have, and you can export to Europe, which means you don't have to pay VAT here. Amazing. 20% margin scheme doesn't matter. You don't have to do that. Isn't this great? And we didn't do any of that. And that then has a knock-on effect for things like, yes, so now there's a struggle, which means that we can't focus on the things that we need to focus on for 2025. But I think we are getting there. I mean, I love the GCC is great because it gives so many ideas for how we can help. So finding the resources there. And I think that, galleries closing, they're not closing it at a great, as much as they were. It sort of 5 years, in the extreme post-COVID. And with the auction houses laying off staff, I mean, Altisse's takeover of, Drahi's takeover of Sotheby's doesn't help that. So I think that that's just another element. But yeah, I try and keep positive. I hate the negative because, there's so much that we have to offer, and we give such a breadth of beauty and knowledge to the world. And I think it's a shame to focus on the negative of that as opposed to the positive. But
Absolutely, absolutely. No, I couldn't agree with you more, Tova. And I've just noticed in the chat we've got a couple of questions which I think are totally they're related but also exceptionally relevant. Anna's asked, do you foresee major art events adjusting their formats or geographies in response to increased or the persistence of tariffs in 25, 26? Are you seeing a little bit of that, Chip?
100%. I mean, again, I'm not an expert in sort of art fairs and art events policy.
Mhm.
But the focus on the Middle East is enormous. It was what we thought Asia was going to be 15 years ago. Um, it's, Asia is doing I'm sorry, the Middle East is doing a really good job of presenting itself as an alternative, especially to America, where I fear art fairs. I mean, who knows whether or not the Winter Antique Show will be going forward, because if the tariffs aren't decided, then they're going to have a lot of international dealers who won't be able to come because they can't afford to or they don't really want to. So
Mhm.
I think the Middle East is doing a great job of saying, come to us, Art Dubai, come see what we've got to offer. Um, and we'll we'll help you. We'll give you all of these things. So the geography, yes. Format, I doubt because we've been trying to figure out how a different format since COVID, and nothing beats looking at something in the flesh. You can't sell, you can't really sell things without that, those heebie-jeebies, right? Those feels. You can't do that. So I don't know. I'm not creative enough to know what other format an art event could take. There are better minds out there than mine for that. I think we might have to try, but I don't know what that would look like. And again, I just don't see anything replacing that sort of standing in front of a painting or a sculpture and really being moved by it. I don't think that there is a substitute.
Yeah, I know. I agree with you. I think those of us on the call who have had the opportunity to experience art fairs, thinking about speaking with Will at the start of the series, his raison d'être is to create that moment. He mentioned the sort of the connection between the dealer and the collector, and to be in the privileged position to be able to do that, to kind of create that context, is a really really powerful and ennobling act. And at the same time, speaking last week with Nick from Vortic, the types of technologies that company and those guys are pursuing, they're really really getting as close as possible to whatever that kind of digital comparison of the in real life experience. And so there's a kind of, I think there's a lot of optimism about how those two different formats can work together and simultaneously and create value across the whole collector, the buyer seller kind of supply chain. I was thinking we're getting kind of reasonably close to our the end of this session. So again, if there's anyone out there that does have questions they'd like for Tova to ruminate on, please pop them in the chat now. We've got a few minutes left. But you did very, very successfully suggest that there are some positives in 2025. We're keeping our happy, sunny, bright faces and hats on. Um, might you potentially be in a position to share a couple of things that you're really hopeful for, or a couple of just, I don't know, anecdotes or thoughts that you think us on the call and maybe sort of seeing this session at a later date can kind of cling to when, I don't know about you, but when I wake up in the morning and I check my news feed, I don't even want to anymore. I'm just worried about what is the next thing that's happened that's coming as a tsunami against us. So any bright glimmers of hope or excitement or innovation that you're interested in and want to share?
Um, uh, I mean, because I'm boring, I'm excited about the idea of different shit like modes of transport to move things and sort of being creative about how we can do that. I love that people are moving more towards things like sea freight. I had a client who I never thought would ever consider putting something on a boat. Was like, yeah, sure, let's think about that. So I get really excited about that because I'm boring. But I think and actually, this relates to a question that was asked on the chat about sort of Middle East countries investing greatly in the art market. I think that that's a good thing. I think more art to more people is always good. And I used to say that about when Brexit happened and people were saying, oh, Paris, will that overtake London? And I thought, great, let's have more art in Paris. Let's have more art. This is what we do. This is why we're here. I think that the Middle East presents some issues for some sectors of the market, especially because of the art that, they won't have sort of images of people or things like that. But that's okay. Let's make more art that doesn't have that. Let's push our boundaries and look at other places where we can bring the sort of joys of what we do to other people and other collectors. So that makes me feel optimistic. The development of new markets and events in other places, that makes me excited for what it's worth.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess exemplifying that is, the development of the Basel brand extending itself in
Like,
the, so,
people talk about that. And it's like, good, go to Hong Kong, go to, freeze, go to Seoul. Perfect. Let's have more of that. Let's have more exposure. Let's have more collectors, and I have an old master background. I worked in an old master gallery for almost 12 years. And then before that, so I worked in the old master sector for 15 years. And I wished that we could be more creative about how to bring the old masters who are not the big names, but these great paintings that have lived lives and survived 600 years, amazing. Next to things that were made last week and bring a new perspective. We should be doing that. And that makes me excited because that's, we say navigating tradition and turbulence. That's the tradition, right? The tradition is the art world going out there, exploring new ideas, looking at new perspectives, and bringing them into our conscience. So I like that. Makes me excited.
No, thank you so much, Tova. This has been so innovating and so enlightening, and it's wonderful to get your professional perspective, but also the market insights that we need to be aware of to successfully get through what's sort of what we've seen play out in the last 6 months and the next sort of 6 months. It's really great that and I agree entirely about the importance of you know enjoying and exploring and proliferating that kind of cultural experience and you know with through the lens of promoting accessibility and making the barriers to access, I think really as low as possible so more people can access these wonderful experiences. And it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the call. And I wanted to just really sort of, I guess, get a final perspective from you if I can, just on we're almost sort of at we are halfway through the year, and 2026, 2027, these things are not far away. Are there any interesting, I don't know, museum or any developments in the logistics sector that you are aware of that you think might be worth us watching as far as a space in the sort of the forthcoming year or two? Any developments of brands that you're seeing growing and establishing larger storage facilities? Is there anything that you're sort of aware of that is worth us paying attention to as the art market evolves sort of going forward?
Um, I can only speak on the logistics side because that's
Mhm.
what I focus on and care about. I'm hoping that shippers will spend more time thinking about sort of reusable crates and carbon footprints and things like that. I, um, like I said, I'm excited. There is more of a development in sea freight divisions, especially, places, a lot of art shippers are doing sort of monthly containers back and forth and around the world, even to Hong Kong from here. Um, I Major developments. I mean, the major development that I knew was coming was the import licenses.
Mhm,
So
mhm,
here we
mhm.
are.
Yeah.
I you've sort of thrown me on that. I'm not sure if there are any big
Mhm.
developments of store. I mean, Crozier's just opened a new storage space, which they say is in Tower Bridge, but it's actually a bit further away than that. I'm not really sure. I'll have to think about that one. Come back to you.
Yeah. No, all good, all good. No, it's been fantastic and discussing this. We've got a final question here. Just looking at the impact of tariffs on art biennales in Asia. The Kochi Biennale. Are you familiar with the Kochi Biennale,
I
or
am
do you know
not.
much? Okay,
No. You,
okay. It's a
you
very
enlighten
specific
me?
question.
Can I be enlightened?
Absolutely. Yeah. But I guess what we have to be aware of is that, as you suggested earlier in the
Sorry, the
call, that
impact of the US tariffs for, I don't, I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. Is it the impact of the US tariffs or the impact of import costs into specific countries in Asia? I'm not sure because
or
there's
potentially
VAT.
reciprocal tariffs, possibly reciprocal tariffs. Oh,
Oh,
yes,
yeah.
US. Right. Perfect.
Okay, fine. I'm sorry. I'm not, I wasn't familiar. So, the US tariff. Yeah, again, I mean, I think that the US tariffs are going to have an effect on all of these events. And
Mhm.
if I was the Kochi Biennale, I would make sure that that was clear as day.
Mhm.
I would make sure that all of these, that if I was running an art fair or a biennale anywhere in the world, I would, except for might be difficult in China, but anywhere else, I would be loud and proud about the fact that there are collectors, there are people who come, and there's no tariffs. I would be, um, yeah, that would be I would make a huge splash about that in any way that I could. If I was, especially if I was in India or in Korea, where there are lots of emerging, events,
Mm.
markets, I would do as much as I could to make that clear. Personally, what do
Yeah.
I know?
No, it makes so much sense, and the spotlight has really been sort of has been blasted on how businesses and individuals in the market should be responding. I think this has been really helpful, Tova. It's been fantastic to have you on the call, and for those who have had the been able to attend, it's been a really enlightening and yeah, just very satisfying conversation. I really appreciate your time, and I really appreciate the fact that Digital Original has created the context for these conversations. I think we've explored some really important themes. And what I wanted to do is just once again, Tova, thank you so much for your time this morning on this morning in London. It's an evening in Melbourne where I'm sitting, so there's not much sunshine out there at all. But that's life. That's the nature of the art trade. It's 24/7. And once again, thank you so much, Tova. It's been an absolute pleasure catching up again, and for all your insights. We really are yeah, humbled. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Tova, and thank you, Garrett, and thank everyone for joining us today. And I want to say that today was the final session of the series, and we are truly grateful you are with us with these important conversations. And special thank, as I said before, to our great speaker, Tova Osad, and our host of the entire series, Garrett Fletcher. And thanks for insights and experience you shared. And before we go, uh, you can visit our site, as I sent in the chat. Everyone who joined today a webinar, and you can learn about Digital Regional more and create your storefront and build your own art storefront. So take care, and I wish everyone great weekend and great Wednesday. So bye.